Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! Okay, so a couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with laryngeal cancer, but I'm currently in remission. And a year and a half ago, I had surgery on my throat. This left a scar which can be scary as I look a little bit like I've had my throat slit. I also have another scar just below from tracheotomy, and my speech is no longer 100%, so it's a bit off-putting. This happened a few weeks ago. I am currently a 19-year-old girl, and I volunteer in a pediatric ward in a cancer center. I generally entertain the kids and support them if they are having a rough time, which, as you can imagine, is not uncommon. I also answer any questions they have about my experiences. A few weeks ago, a woman came in with her kid who was there to see a family member. As usual, I was spending time with the kids and the woman's kid. Not an entitled brat, thank God. The kid came over and asked about my scar and started telling me that it looked cool and that I must be proud of my battle scar. I answer his questions and chuckle at his drastic views. Once he's asked all he wants, he rushes back to his mother who was talking to another woman. This is our entitled mother. She walked over to me and looked like I just keyed her car or something. So I excused myself from the young kids I was sitting coloring with. When she reaches me, she glares before the accusation inevitably comes out. You shouldn't be promoting that nonsense. I'm sorry, I am not following. These are children in pain, sick and dying in here. How could you think it's okay for you to pressure them into your cult-ish perversions? Is cult-ish a word? It's one thing to be a Satanist, but barring a devil's mark in front of the kids? Have you already lost your humanity? By this point, I was getting frustrated and tried to cut in and explain what was happening. But she cut me off. No, not a word from you. I will not let you taint me with your lifestyle choices. Why are you even lurking in a children's cancer ward? I want you off the premises. How dare you? She leaves with no explanation, but I could almost scream as I saw her walk over to one of the security guards. The security guard walks over. I want this woman taken off of the hospital grounds. She has snuck in here to spread her poisonous beliefs into the kids' minds. The security guard looks unsure and thankfully asks me for my side. I politely explain to him that I'm a patient at the adult ward and also a volunteer worker with the children. I also showed him my visitor's badge. I then have to explain that the scar on my neck isn't from a cult and actually a surgical scar. The security guard then tells the entitled mother that she can either get on with her business and leave me alone, or she will be the one escorted out. The entitled mother resigned and walked off, and I assumed that was it. But she came back later with a different security guard and told the same nonsense and tried to pass off the picture of roses I was helping a girl draw off satanic symbols. Thankfully, the original security guard noticed and she was forced to leave. The rest of my day was fantastic, so meh. It all started when we moved into this charming community called Green Meadows. The houses had white picket fences and the streets were lined with beautiful trees. Little did we know that behind this picture-perfect facade lurked an entitled tyrant, Karen, the self-proclaimed HOA president. As we were settling in, we noticed that our new home needed a few accessibility modifications, you see. My dad had been in a wheelchair for years, and he needed a ramp to easily move in and out of the house. So, we decided to build one. One day, as the ramp construction began, we heard a loud knock on a door. We opened it to find Karen standing there, her arms crossed and an annoyed expression plastered across her face. You can't build that ramp. It's against the HOA rules, she said, waving her finger at us. But my dad needs it to access our home, I explained. Karen just snorted, I don't care. Rules are rules. Now, my dad is one of the most resilient individuals I know. He wasn't going to let Karen stand in the way of his independence. and so we decided to press on and finish the ramp, regardless of her protests. Over the next few days, Karen continued to harass us. She sent us threatening letters and slapped us with hefty fines for violating the HOA rules. It was frustrating and disheartening, but we knew we were doing the right thing. Let's just say my dad knows a thing or two about the law. On the eve of our move-in day, we couldn't wait to finally settle into our new home. But as we approached the house that morning, I was utterly shocked. There she was, Karen, standing defiantly among some construction workers, clearly tearing down the ramp. "Stop right there. You can't do that," I shouted. Karen turned to me with an arrogant smile. "Watch me." The workers were hesitant, torn between Karen's demand and my yelling. And that's when my dad emerged from behind me, wheeling himself forward with a determined look in his eyes. He said calmly, "Lady, you have no idea what it's like to live with a disability. This ramp is not just a structure, it is my independence. You have no right taking that away from me." Karen scoffed and rolled her eyes. "Your sub-story won't change a thing. It's against the rules and it's coming down." But little did Karen know that my dad wasn't just an ordinary person. My dad was a judge. Yes, you heard that right. Little did she know that karma was about to deliver a swift punch to her entitlement. "Dad, do something. Please do something," I pleaded. He took out his phone and made a call. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived at the scene. When the police officers arrived, they were in for quite the surprise. They stepped out of their patrol car. They immediately recognized my dad, and their expressions lit up. "Judge Adamson, it's an honor to see you here, sir," the first officer said, extending his hand for a handshake. "Likewise, officer. Thank you for coming," my dad replied. The other officer, who had also recognized my dad, chimed in. "Is there anything we can do to help, Your Honor?" My dad smiled and said, "Well, there might be. The situation involves a violation of the Fair Housing Act, and I believe Karen here has some explaining to do." The look on Karen's face was priceless. I had never seen anyone go from arrogant entitlement to being pale as a ghost so quickly. She seemed to realize that her entitled actions had landed her in hot water with someone who not only knew the law inside out but also had the authority to hold her accountable. Her eyes widened and her jaw dropped, and for a moment she seemed unable to form any coherent words. The revelation hit her like a ton of bricks, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she realized the magnitude of her actions. It was a classic caught in the act moment, and Karen knew that she had dug herself into a deep hole. As a judge, my dad had the power to not only uphold the law, but also to ensure that justice was served. And justice was exactly what Karen was about to receive. Her voice trembled as she stammered, "I didn't know he was a judge. I just wanted the rules to be followed." Oh, for God's sake, what rules? The officers had always respected my dad, not just for his position as a judge, but also for the kind and compassionate person he was. They had seen him go out of his way to help others and treat everyone with fairness and understanding. As the officers listened to both sides of the story, it became apparent that Karen's actions were not only misguided but also discriminatory. They exchanged glances. Then one of the officers turned to Karen and said, "Ma'am, it seems like you were acting without fully understanding the situation. The ramp is a reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act, and your attempts to tear it down are not only illegal but also deeply inappropriate." Karen stammered, "I didn't know." And one of the officers added, "Ignorance is not an excuse for violating someone's rights." The officers then proceeded to take statements from the construction workers who she brought to dismantle the ramp, and each worker recounted how Karen had insisted on tearing it down despite knowing that it was intended for someone with a disability. The officers finished their investigation, and the evidence against Karen was undeniable. They informed her that she would be arrested for her actions and taken into custody. As they led Karen away, my dad nodded appreciatively at the officers and said, "Thank you for your prompt response, gentlemen." On the day of Karen's court proceedings, Karen sat nervously at the defendant's table, her once confident demeanor replaced with apparent anxiety. The prosecution presented a compelling case outlining the charges against Karen, which included destruction of private property, harassment, and violation of the Fair Housing Act. The evidence against her was substantial, including witness testimonies from the workers and surveillance footage of her attempts to tear down the ramp. Karen's lawyer struggled to find a solid defense. He attempted to argue that Karen had not understood the ramifications of her actions, but the evidence presented by the prosecution painted a clear picture of her entitled behavior. Finally, it was time for the judge's verdict. The judge sentenced her to 1 year in prison, community service, and mandatory sensitivity training to better understand the challenges faced by individuals with disabilities. And so, as we left the courtroom, we were glad this whole ordeal was done, and that now we can live peacefully in our new neighborhood without having a dark cloud like this hovering over us all the time. In the end, our move to Green Meadows had been far from ordinary, but it had brought us closer to a group of people who had shown us the true meaning of compassion and unity. I always thought these crazy people who don't mind their own business must be a rare breed, that I would never encounter one of them, but somehow I did. So a little background before I start. I was born in Pakistan, but came to Canada when I was 3. But by that time I could already speak in Urdu, Punjabi and Hindu. The languages are fairly similar in many regards, and then I came to Canada and English was my 4th language. As I grew up, I also learned Arabic, French, and Japanese to varying competencies, but all within a realm of conversational. Having grown up in Canada, I have no accent when I speak in English, so you wouldn't be able to tell me apart from a Caucasian person if you spoke with me over the phone. But also having learned so many languages, I'm able to pronounce a lot of sounds fairly accurately. So I found authentic in all languages that I speak to all but native speakers. Most of the languages that I know sound different enough from each other that someone that doesn't know them can still tell that the language is different. I've traveled back home to Pakistan a few times and I would always encounter those beggars who come with elaborate stories, like my wife is sick and she needs surgery. And I managed to get money for that, but I need money for the flight to reach her and so on. I came up with a fun counter to that, which was that I would act like I didn't understand them at all. I would start speaking in a different language, a language that they wouldn't know. Japanese was my go-to language while in Pakistan. The reaction those people would have was quite hilarious. As per apparently new rules, instead of acronyms, I'll use fake names. I'll give them all 5-letter names so the columns line up decently enough. So anyway, on to my story now. The cast. Karen, the star of the show, Jimmy, Karen's husband, a decent human being, Zaraf, me, Wifey, my wife, Singh, the restaurant manager. So my wife and I were at an Indian restaurant. We were enjoying dinner and having a conversation. We speak in a mix of Urdu and English, just mixing with whatever feels easy. To someone listening in, they will be able to understand enough to figure out what we are talking about in most cases. We were sitting at a booth table, so it was only open from one side. Karen and her family, Jimmy, and her 2 daughters that looked like they were in their early teens were sitting at an open table with an empty table between us. My wife is Pakistani like me. What some Pakistanis like to do is eat rice with their hands. I prefer a spoon myself, but at this time my wife was eating with her hands. Apparently, this Karen got offended at seeing my wife eat with her hands. When she came over, I started speaking in different languages, acting like I didn't understand what she was saying in English. I'll translate the conversation. Here's how it went. Karen walks over to our table with a sour expression on her face. Jimmy, her husband, calls to her, telling her to sit back down and leave us alone. But she ignores him. She addresses my wife directly. "What's wrong with you? Can't you eat your food in a civilized manner like the rest of us?" I tell her in Urdu, "Huh? What do you want? Can't you see we're eating?" Karen looks at me with surprise. "What did you just say?" I say to my wife in Urdu, Don't talk to her in English, just do what I'm doing. And then I say to Karen, you're just a crazy woman, go sit back down. Why aren't you speaking in English? My wife starts smiling and I try hard to keep a straight face. My wife says, we are just enjoying our meal. Why don't you go and sit down? I just heard you speaking in English. I know you can talk in English. Yeah, I can, but I choose to not do so. My wife says to me, I think she's getting upset. And I reply, I know, that's what makes this so much fun. Stop it. Talk in English like I heard you before. Then I start talking in Japanese. So you were listening in on our conversation? Don't you have any manners? Wait, that's some other language now. What the hell is this? Her husband yells, leave them alone, Karen. They don't speak English. I know they do. They are just pretending not to. It doesn't matter, just sit down. I started waving toward her table. That's right, go back to your table, you loud cow. Then her husband tells her, Karen, they aren't doing anything wrong. Leave them alone. She's eating with her hands. I can't let the girls learn her uncivilized ways. I say to my wife in Hindi, start licking your fingers. My wife starts licking the rice on her right hand off the top part of her fingers, and that makes Karen rage even more. Oh my god, look at how gross she's being. Stop looking at her if you don't like it then. Her husband tells her. Then I say in Arabic, hey you dumb witch, do you behave this way everywhere you go? He changed the languages again. I know he did. His accent changed. I then reply in Japanese, yep, and I can keep changing. Speak in English. Her husband tells her, you must have heard them wrong. They don't know any English. Leave them alone. Then why are they living here? They don't deserve to live here if they don't know English. I was having a hard time keeping a straight face at this point, so I disguised it by raising my voice and appearing angry. I gestured towards her and then pointed at her table. I say in Arabic, are you so dumb you can't even listen to your husband? Go sit down and stop embarrassing yourself. You don't deserve to be here. Get out. At this point, the restaurant's manager shows up to see what all the commotion was about. He's an Indian guy with a pretty heavy accent when he speaks in English, so I knew he'd speak either Hindi or Punjabi. The manager says, excuse me, can you please keep your voice down? What's going on here? This woman is eating with her hands, and it's disgusting. She's corrupting my children with her barbaric ways. Ma'am, there is no rules that forbid her from eating with her hands. Please, leave them alone, or I will have to ask you to leave. Now, her husband gets up and comes over to where Karen is. Sit down, Karen. You've embarrassed yourself enough. This is why I can't take you anywhere. I say in Punjabi, ignore this dumb cow. Her brain is smaller than a laddu. It's an Indian sweet. The manager starts laughing at my comments and Karen gets even redder in the face since she probably thinks we're making fun of her. All of you should go back to your country. Her husband just takes her arm and leads her back to their table and sits her down, telling her to shut up. Her daughters look like they want to sink into the floor from embarrassment. I ramble a few more sentences in varying languages as a kind of venting before my wife tells me to just leave it alone. We finished our dinner about 10 minutes later with Karen glaring at us the whole time. I go pay the bill and as we were walking out of the restaurant, we passed near Karen's table. I call out to her husband in perfect English with no accent while smiling and I give him a wave. Hey buddy, I hope you enjoy your dinner. Have a good night. Karen's eyes bulge as she screams. I knew it, see? They know English. She tried to stand up suddenly but instead ended up falling over backwards in her seat. My wife and I left the restaurant laughing before she could do anything else. This took place years ago but still makes me laugh at the sheer stupidity of it all. It started as all truly great sagas published on the internet begin. When I met a random guy through a friend at a bar in a city. Let's call the guy I met Mark for the purpose of this story. My friend had introduced me to Mark because for a few years leading up to that introduction, I shared an idea I had for a business with anyone who would listen. I was told Mark wanted to start his own business, had worked in the industry, knew a lot about the subject matter required, and thought my idea was good. Mark and I met up for a lunch. We hit it off and he said he'd start the business as a CEO and agreed to me taking a part-time operational role. I agreed to help solely in a part-time operational role because I couldn't afford to quit my day job. I put in 15% of the cash for 5% ownership since Mark was going to put in founder hours, 80 plus hours a week, and agreed to put up 85% of the cash, which was more money than I could afford to risk on a new venture. I worked part-time. I did what I said I would. I even tried to be of assistance on things I had no experience with. I connected Mark with a fella I had done business with before. We will call him Paul. Paul and I got into a dispute ourselves. More on this later. Anyway, let's fast forward a few months, and I got into a dispute with Mark over stationery. Yes, stationery not being to his liking caused him to flip out. This was despite him picking the stationery out. Next up, the contract I got from Mark was not what we agreed to. The legal work required a few months to get it done, and I had expected delays, but when I finally got it, the paperwork didn't represent what I had agreed to own. Not only that, but my investment wasn't being acknowledged under the terms we had committed to when I put the money in. Now, as I said, I wasn't able to risk much and I only invested what I could afford to lose. So this wasn't a huge sum of money. I didn't want to make a big deal about it since the amount was small and he began promising a new contract when the business could pay for the lawyers to make changes. I signed nothing. Then it worsened. Mark and I started to fight anytime we were in a room together. And I think back, it's almost comical how angry he will get in my presence. I have other things to do with my time than squabble over stuff like stationery, so I worked on my areas of the business and hoped things would grow. I stopped in whenever I could and would help out regularly as needed with a little Mark interaction as possible. Paul would intervene sometimes when Mark would get particularly difficult to be around. Anyway, fast forward about 2 years and Mark can't help but tell everyone who will listen that the business is going well. I have no idea how well things are going because Mark isn't giving me any updates. I get a call around Christmas from Mark. He wishes me a happy holiday, then drops the bomb on me that he wants to terminate my involvement and refund my investment. I decline the investment refund and say I'm happy to no longer work with him. In my head, I think it's kind of hilarious that he thinks this will just end that easily, but I said nothing to that. According to him, Mark and I hang up with him aggravated about my refusal to take the refund of my investment. Mark then sent me an email that I had resigned. This had no basis in fact, but certainly was creative about what we had just discussed. I corrected him immediately in a reply stating that he wanted to no longer work together, and that I can see that being the case but want to discuss my investment. A few days later, Mark demands I come pick up a check for a reimbursement for my investment. I do not come and get it. Next thing you know, the company attorney huffs and puffs and tries to scare me with some strongly worded letter. This is the same idiot attorney who screwed up my contract to work on the business, and also my investment agreement. Let's call this attorney Mr. Khan for the sake of this story. I sent an email response to Mr. Khan that he screwed up. The company seems to be doing well, that I hear rumors about how well that I want to be on this for the foreseeable future, and I will not take a one-to-one cash out for what I put in. The attorney then emails me back stating in writing that Mark never accepted my electronic transfer into the company account. Instead, Mark has another company he accepted the money into, a company I've never heard of, a company that is different from the name of the recipient on my electronic transfer, a company that will be committing wire fraud to accept the money I sent. On that note, I did some sleuthing online. I found out Mark had been forming one company every month or two. Then there were media reports and documents he let slip in shared drives he forgot I had access to from when we agreed to work together. Mark was too cheap and stupid to pay for tech help, so he was using my shared folders I had created, and I certainly wasn't obligated to turn off the shares if he wanted to work out of them. Those documents showed me Mark had recently raised money in a company I sent the payment to at 200 times the valuation I had bought into it at. And Mark didn't disclose my investment to the new investors. Mark had, however, put me on documents showing my ownership to previous investors. Not on documents I have ever seen before, but documents he had been sending around. When I share my suspicions that Mark is committing wire fraud with Mr. Khan, I am told I am the one breaking the law by knowing anything about the investment documents the company has used. Mr. Khan tells me that by not picking up my check I will not be entitled to any money and to contact law enforcement if I think something illegal has happened. He cautions though that I will be the one in trouble. Cue the malicious compliance. I let the different respective members of the Securities and Exchange Commission along with law enforcement know what happened to me. I provided them with all the documents I had from the matter. It took about 5 years for the investigation to conclude, for charges to be brought, for a trial to conclude, and for Mark to go to jail. They say the government is slow, but they aren't kidding with just how slow. Maybe it was slow because Mark was running a large, tens of millions of dollars large fraud. Anyway, Mark will be serving time for about 30 felony charges they found, uncovering the details of his Ponzi scheme. He will be away for a long time. I never did anything wrong. With the information I was able to provide, Mr. Khan ended up getting disbarred. There were other things Mr. Khan did outside of what is shared in this post that I could not share, or it could help to identify me to the folks involved. The investigators credited me with bringing the fraud to their attention. I gained an education and I got to help bring down a crook. The sheer stupidity of Mark is that he didn't even follow the business plan I had. He just used it as a story to convince investors to give him money. It is a business model that works very, very well. It took a few more years, but I am now in a position to be pursuing this business full-time, with people of high integrity who all work together to ensure each other's success. We expect to have an extremely profitable year in 2023 after proving the business model worked in 2022. Context. For starters, I will say that I'm rather blessed in the gene pool. I don't mean to come off as conceited. It's just full truth for the sake of the story. But because of that, during high school, the boys saw me as nothing but arm candy. My revenge was served in my senior year of high school, and I'm now graduated. This story involves two boys whose names I will not mention. The story. Throughout high school, I was extremely quiet. My name was known in my school, but not by choice, even though I kept to myself during all of high school. Yet people still knew my business and I knew theirs. Freshman year, I had a class with a boy, Blondie. I had never seen this boy before, and in my complete honest opinion, he was unfortunate looking. He'll pass me notes during class saying I was pretty and asking for my Snapchat. After a few weeks, I gave in cause I was quite the loner, and I thought it wouldn't hurt to know someone. At first, he was charming, constant compliments, sweet gestures, really the whole package. He asked me to homecoming, and at first I politely declined because me and my friends planned on going as a group and celebrating my best friend's birthday afterwards. He practically begged me for weeks to go with him, so I said fine, and I went out of pity. Like I said, the time leading up to this, he was so sweet and charming. Then once he thought he had me, he completely changed. He started bragging about me in all the wrong ways, forcing me to be late to my classes because I had to walk him to his and I had to be happy about it. God forbid I showed 1 ounce of disappointment for constantly being late to my classes. We attended one of the school events leading up to homecoming together, and I was absolutely not allowed to leave his side. The whole night I was accompanied by Blondie and his friend Wheezy. I had to beg him to let me see my friends, and when he never complied, I ended up finding a moment to slip away. When he noticed my absence, it got ugly. Blondie and Wheezy came up to me surprisingly calmly and asked for me to come speak with them for a moment. I hesitated, but I figured it was best for me if I just went with them. Once we were out of sight of the hundreds of other students, they each grabbed one of my arms and dragged me into the woods that surrounded the school. All I will say is that unspeakable acts were committed against me. At the end of that night, I looked them right in their sorry faces and said, "You'll never see a Pride Day past graduation." From that moment, I had every intention of ruining these boys' lives, no matter how long it took. After that night, I was distraught, and understandably so. I told none of my friends or family until 3 years later, when I knew exactly what I wanted to do. It is worth mentioning that because Weezy and Blondie were fairly popular, everyone knew I had relations with them. But of course, no one knew about that night. I must have made quite an impact on Blondie, because for the remainder of my high school career, I would hear new rumors about me here and there. The typical rumors we've all heard. I was a girl who never spoke, but everyone knew. I was a girl whose name got called during attendance, and when you heard it, you turned to whisper to your friends and texted your group chat about me. Despite all of that, I kept my peace and quiet. I never started problems, nor did I even slightly entertain anything that came out of anyone's mouth. During my senior year, my older cousin visited with his family from out of state. To my advantage, my cousin was a total tech whiz. I mean, this kid knew the in and out of every little thing. Predictably, his fascination came with the perk of being able to hack into anything and everything. This was straight out of a movie. My cousin and I were extremely close, and I felt it was time to start my revenge. I told him everything, sparing no details. He was understandably unsettled and was down to help me however I wanted. He was able to get into the school system and change their grades here and there. They weren't the smartest kids in class, so bad grades weren't necessarily put past them. We hacked into their social media and changed small things here and there, posted and texted embarrassing things and so on. I enjoyed doing these small things, but I still wanted them to suffer. My cousin's older brother was fortunately a police officer, so we made a plan to go to the school principal. At this point, I was already 18 and didn't need to be accompanied by an adult or legal guardian. As vulnerable and uncomfortable as it was for me, I sat in his office, told him everything, and asked if the security footage possibly went back 3 years. Much to my surprise, it did. The only reason I even tried with the cameras that may or may not have been in the woods was because of the thickness of these woods. I figured it was worth a shot considering the state of our country when it comes to school safety. It would be smart to have cameras covering these woods. And I was right. My school had cameras set up in every inch of that place, and they kept it all on a few hard drives for each year as a personal precaution because of FERPA. I asked my principal to not pursue any punishments on the boys because I would be doing it myself, and he would only get it my way. I was fully prepared to have been stopped at that moment, but he said okay, and let me be on my way. I brought it to my police cousin's attention, and at this point, my parents as well. My police cousin and parents went to school and requested the video footage to be handed over, and under FERPA, nothing can prevent them from turning it over to the police because it was not an educational video. My cousin took it from there in that department and filed a case. Sometime later, between the embarrassing social media posts and tweaks in their online statuses, they quickly plummeted to the bottom of the social rank. Some more time passes and the entire school is now aware of Weezy and Blondie's unfortunate acts on that fateful night mid-October. The two boys have been arrested from their homes and charged with sexual assault. They were both tried as adults because they were 17, and that's quite a hefty crime. Both sentenced to 20 years, release date being sometime in 2041. I've written this story in such a way that leaves out the details of how severely I was hurt by these two. The words they used, the force they used, the physical pain they caused me. I like to believe that I am an extremely strong woman for being able to hold it in for as long as I did. I essentially went through the healing process on my own, and for that I applaud myself. I'm sure there were other ways to approach this, but I do not care. They deserve nothing, and I'm proud of myself. I worked nights for over a year. The route home took me on a rural one-lane highway. No street lights, lots of curves, lots of trees, lots of deer. The speed limit on this stretch is 55 miles per hour. Almost everyone goes 65. But I had noticed cops cracking down on people speeding on that road, so I stopped pushing the speed limit so much. I was on my way home tired after a 12-hour overnight shift. It was pitch black out. No stars or moon because of cloud cover. I mean, it was dark. But there was no one else on the roads at that time. Still, I didn't want to deal with deer or drive too fast on the winding roads while tired, so I kept my speed pretty close to the speed limit. A car pulls up behind me, rides my tail, flashing his lights, making it like he wants to pass. Now, there is no shoulder, so I can't just pull over and let him go. Also, there is no one else out on the roads at this hour and hasn't been for the whole drive. He could easily pass me, so I slow down and he keeps on my tail. Despite being on a straightaway where he could easily pass me, I set my cruise control at exactly 55 miles per hour and decided to ignore him. Because I'm petty like that. I was going 58, almost 60 on the straightaways, but not anymore. You're gonna be a jerk despite having ample opportunity to pass? That's on you, dog. As soon as we get to a no passing zone, as you do, he apparently decides he's had enough and floors it, zipping around me. Finally, moments later, I see flashing lights in my rear view. A police car pulls around me and pulls over the impatient driver. Boy, am I glad I kept it at the speed limit.